3 Lives 3 Worlds. The Pillow Book. Lower volume. Original work by Tangqi Gongzi. English translation, Hamster 428. English editing, rockharlequin, Lily, JoannaKuang. Part 4 The Shadow's Souls. Chapter 7. Spring in the imperial city always arrived later compared to the flourishing scenery of the south. After viewing camellias at Guanzhen Palace, the cruise ship returned to the capital, just in time for the late blooming cherries and magnolias. Streets and towns were awash in blossoms. It was such a pleasant sight. Yet however lovely the spring scenery was, Fengju's sentiments could not be moved into noble generosity. Ever since she returned to the royal palace, she regularly kept herself behind closed doors, wondering how her 2 sisters Junyo and Changdi were going to crawl back from the pit. Changdi had waged war with her in the Juque cage. Then without waiting for her to even rest, Junyo had come to give her another kick of lovesick drug. In all her life, this was the first time she ever got victimized by others time after time again. It had given some blow to her pride. Shang Jun had placed the 2 princesses under house arrest. He did not say he would punish them, nor did he say he would not punish them. Considering Shang Jun's affection for Changdi, Fengju reckoned this matter would be blowing over in a few days. But obviously, it wasn't something she could get over, and so she waited for the time when they would be released. She carried this intention out with her whole body and mind, and eagerly counted each day on her fingers until her waiting was alas proven to be in vain. On the March 27th, a message issued from within the palace declared that Princess Junyo had not adhered to boudoir conducts, that she had committed fornication and begot with an illegitimate child, and as such she had greatly shamed the imperial family and was thus sentenced to be beheaded. Her immortal name was to forever be erased in the Book of Merits and she was soon to be executed. As for Changdi, although nothing was mentioned on the surface, a few vague private words had come from behind the curtains. It was said Princess Changdi had broken Shang Jun's beloved lamp a few days ago and was to be exiled to the desolate frontier to reflect on her sin. Fengju was somewhat dumbfounded when she heard this news. A pregnancy out of wedlock, yet the child in the womb seemed to have had the king and queen's favor. She had been dubious at first, wondering if perhaps the Bianiao folks were more broad-minded than their own King Kaiyu. After asking Su Moi, she came to know that Junyo's conceived child wasn't an ordinary child, but that he was thought to possibly be the next archmage of the clan. Throughout history, all archmagi had been born from unmarried maidens who were impregnated through the absorption of divine essence. This was why despite carrying a child out of wedlock, Junyo could flaunt around righteously and was even able to invite Zais to leave the mountains to especially take care of her. Fengju could still remember the day when she had lamented that Junyo had been too blessed. But now, somehow her unborn child was instead said to be produced from an affair. Before she could send people out to inquire, Cha-Cha had brought Su Moi into the room. Ever since the lovesick spell incident, Mo Xiao had rarely looked for her alone in order to avoid unnecessary rumors. Yet he came so suddenly today, showing that there must be some pressing matters. Sure enough, Mo Xiao wasn't as calm as usual. He offered much fewer roundabout words, and after clearing his throat with the warm tea in his hands, he came straight to the point. I said to you last month that there were several major events which decided Irania's ending and that I needed you to make the same choices as she did. Do you still remember these words? Fengju nodded. Mo Xiao was contemplative. The first event is here. Fengju cleared her throat to rally some spirits. Perhaps you won't be happy with this, Mo Xiao said with knitted brow, but right now we must look at the big picture. He looked at her and lowered his voice, save Junyo. Fengju widened her eyes at him. In reality, Fengju had much of King Kai's strength of character. If you treated her with 1 part respect, she would treat you with 10 parts respect. If you treated her with 1 part contempt, although not quite 10 times the return, she would definitely pay back in some way. Always trying to strive for virtue, the 9-tailed foxes of the King Kaihu kingdom were never tolerant of shady business, nor did they forgive treachery, still less did they use kindness to repay evil such as this. Mo Xiao had always been the smartest person in the West Sea and one of the best strategists among his immortal peers. He had smartly recognized that this world was operating according to the past. Junyo's beheading on the execution scaffold by the order of Shang Jun was only a matter of time. He cleverly considered that the queen had previously handled this matter inappropriately, leaving her without leverage, which led to the unmasking of Junyo's pregnancy. Taking this into account, he had thought to leave enough time for Fengju to first resolve her personal feud with Junyo and Changdi. Then when Junyo was brought to the scaffold, he would ask Fengju to keep her promise to save her. With her genial easygoing personality, this was going to go as planned. Despite calculating hundreds and thousands of things, however, Mo Xiao miscalculated Donghua Daijun. In the past, Junyo's pregnancy was uncovered on April 17. But the outgoing message from the palace came all of 20 days early this time. A thought flashed across his mind in that instant. In the small kitchen, Daijun had serenely mentioned to him something about tidiness. Now that they arrived to this point, he finally knew what Daijun meant when he spoke of tidiness. Daijun must have already known this secret behind the Bianiao royal family. There was power, there were women, there were disputes in this vast world, and thus there had also been secrets. There was always some sort of secrets like this in each monarchy, and there was nothing new about the secret of the Bianiao clan. Everything only ever boiled down to 2 things of relevance: power and women. This tangled past was actually quite simple. Legends had it the incumbent Shang Jun, Xiongli Ke, had usurped the throne from his brother. His beloved queen, Lady Qinghua, was none other than the sister-in-law he had stolen from his older brother. In stories passed down, Lady Qinghua had been faithful that year. She originally wanted to follow her husband in death, but since she was pregnant with Junyo, anxious with love, Xiongli Ke promised he'd allow her to keep his brother's blood if she would only stay alive, and thus she survived. Qinghua gave birth to Junyo as wished and raised her like a precious treasure. Afterward, she gave birth to Irania, who was Xiongli Q's flesh and blood. But because she had hated Xiongli Ke in those days, she personally threw the newborn child into a snake pit the moment she came out of her mother's womb. This was also the beginning of Irania's pitiful fate. Keeping Junyo was a reluctant tactic Xiongli Ke used that year as a last resort. The more he saw how clever and beautiful the child was growing up each day before his eyes, the longer the thorn in his heart grew. Xiongli Ke was soon determined to get rid of her. Unfortunately, Lady Qinghua guarded her child almost too carefully. Junyo was also to blame in this matter by having an illicit relationship with her writing teacher and begetting his child. The Bianiaos had a unique constitution, it was difficult for them to conceive, and even more difficult for them to abort. A small mistake could take both lives. Abortion meant death, having Xiao no also meant death. In order to protect the only blood of her ex-husband, after much mulling, Lady Qinghua had no other option but to plant this blatant lie. Su Moi sighed. These things had really happened in the past. No matter how tightly covered a wooden box was, airflow still could not be prevented. If Daijun wanted to find out something which had a form and shadow such as this, there would always be a way to find out. With his daily image of planting trees and throwing baits, Daijun had appeared to be unmindful of worldly affairs. Nevertheless, he had heard that the universe's master once helmed the 6 realms with an iron fist, and naturally did not believe that after falling into this place, Daijun wouldn't question the causes and consequences. To know everything without seeing anything, to know the end by seeing only the beginning, this was Daijun. Daijun had not said much that day in the small kitchen, but he had likely already foreseen today's outcome in his mind. Su Moi stared absently at the cup of green tea. Junyo could never die. If she died, how would this opera be sung in the future? Since it was Daijun who called the shots and dangled Junyo's matter before Shangjun's eyes, it was Daijun who wanted to punish Junyo using Xiongli-Q's blade. Then didn't this mean that whoever to come out and save Junyo would become Daijun's enemy? Whatever the case might be, he unsurprisingly still had to rely on Fengju. When Mo Xiao came back from his thoughts, he saw Fengju sitting there staring at him, her brow creasing. She said in puzzlement, "Although Irania didn't cause as much trouble as I did, wasn't she at strife with Junyo in the past? Why would she want to save Junyo's life at this junction? I don't really get this logic. If you can convince me today, I'll do whatever you say, but if you can't convince me, I'll have to think about it." Mo Xiao was glad she actually knew she was causing troubles. He pulled a stool over to sit, sipped half a cup of tea, and continued with a storyteller's appearance. The one Irania wanted to save wasn't Junyo, but rather Chen Yet. He then asked her, "How much do you know about Irania and Chen Yet?" Fengju lifted her little finger, her thumb pointing to the tip of it to show Mo Xiao. "Only this wee much." Mo Xiao held the teacup, and after a long time, said, "Then I'll tell you a wee more." In life, the most helpless thing was in the form of but 4 words, if at the start. In Mo Xiao's memory, the start was April 27 of many years ago on the scaffold where Junyo was executed, and the if pertained to the fact that he had led Irania to see the execution that day. The month of April, as mentioned in the mortal's poetry, inevitably contained a certain sorrow of parting, or perhaps the separation of life and death. In Siming's words, April was the month of demise. Although Fanyan Valley was far removed from the troubled dusty world, April that year had also been blanketed under a bloody atmosphere. First, the Royal Academy had executed the teacher who taught the eldest princess penmanship. Then, the palace took care of several servants who served the eldest princess. Soon after, even the eldest princess was to be executed on Lingshu Terrace. She bore 2 felonies, one being deceiving the crown, the other, adultery. Whose blood ran in the eldest princess's veins. Although the clansmen for many years had kept silence, they finally had to ask themselves whether this was Shangjun's thunderous scheme. Those who didn't know the truth took umbrage with the eldest princess for being shameless and praised Shangjun for being strict and impartial. In this matter, Zhongli Ke had gotten his cake and eaten it too. Even if it wasn't a glorious matter, the beheading of a princess nevertheless needed to be recorded into the history annals. The sentencing official pulled his hair for days on out on how to euphemize the written words for future generations' sake. Those in attendance for the execution that day were all clansmen. The location was chosen with much deliberation to be Lingsha Terrace outside the holy shrine. Even the executioners were carefully selected from 3 generational families of executioners. Even his own West Sea and Zhukongtian couldn't match up to such attentive preparation for a beheading. On the day of the execution, he eagerly prepared a packet of melon seeds and brought Irania to the execution arena, finding their way to the first row. He watched the show with genuine interest, but Irania wore a solemn expression. In her hands was a reincarnation sutra, as if she had come to send the sister whom she never got along with on her final journey. Originally a ceremonial terrace where the archmage prayed for blessings, the execution Lingsha terrace floated above ground. Behind it and slightly higher was the sacred shrine surfacing vaguely in the sky. With Buddhist hymns ringing outward, the entire scenery was that of an ethereal fairyland. This was the holy shrine of Qinan. In the wind was a scent of wild flowers, on the sky were small drifting clouds. Junyo stood on Lingsha terrace dressed in all white. She didn't resemble a criminal awaiting her death penalty, but rather a stunning dancer dancing atop the clouds. Although her condemned shoulders slumped in abjection, her face innately bore a certain aristocratic air. In the arena, everyone had taken their seats. Men separated into 2 lines on the execution scaffold. They carried out a mighty saber the length of 3 persons. From it reverberated the intermittent sounds of a tiger's roars. This saber a holy execution device belonging to the criminal bureau. The blade was to be unsealed by the blood taken from the beheaded's wrist, releasing its guardian double-winged white-headed tiger. After devouring the beheaded's flesh and soul, it would trap the soul inside the saber and keep the dead from reincarnating for many years. Beheading was written just so in the mortal realm, but this was what made the execution a bit different. The moment the saber was mounted and the blood from Junyo's wrist was sacrificed to the magical blade, the light breeze around the grounds suddenly turned into blasts of wind. A roar bellowed. Within the shiny saber was a clear reflection of a tiger. Dark clouds rolled in before their eyes as daylight hid away. A ferocious tiger broke free from the blade. Junyo staggered, color draining from her face. A white flash appeared, followed by a piercing sound of a sword. By the time this sound ended, a long sword had stabbed 7 inches into the large tiger, neatly forcing it back into the saber. No matter how rescue the princess is performed, it would always be a great play and never too outdated. The atmosphere weighed heavily, gusts picked up on 4 sides. The injured tiger breathed raggedly inside the saber. After the changing storm, the tightly closed doors of Qinan Shrine unexpectedly creaked wide open. Black feathered wings casted a faint shadow on Lingsha Terrace. The young archmage stood on the stage. On his face was an icy detachment. Yet to retract the wings at his back, he shielded a shivering Junyo behind him and looked to the distance where Shang Jun sat. His voice was clear yet not without restraint. I did some research on our punishment laws and came upon the chapter on the Holy Saber penalty. It is written that once the Holy Saber was released, if the punished could seal the tiger back into the blade before his soul dispersed, it meant the heavens were merciful of his life, and regardless of what felony he committed, clemency would be given for the death sentence. Wise sovereign, will the same judgment apply to Princess Junyo's punishment on this day? The White Knight was not reckless, he was courageous as well as intelligent. He knew when to advance and when to retreat. Shang Jun stonily considered his options. Criminal statutes were set by the ancestors, and the witnesses present were all clansmen. Needless to say, refusal wasn't an option. On the other hand, the double-winged white-headed tiger was notorious for its tenacity. Once the saber was released, never would it let go until it had had enough blood to drink. Despite there being a clemency clause, and some execution robberies had happened in the past, no one had ever escaped from the white-headed tiger's fangs. Just because the White Knight's sword was able to push it back a little didn't mean that the tiger would be so useless. It was but a matter of seconds before it would regain its strength and continue to break free again. Whether the courageous and intelligent knight could save his princess or not would have to depend on his luck. The wind blew chillingly. With a wave of his arm, the black-robed archmage summoned his sword back into his hand. The white-headed tiger was released from the saber once more. Junyo was pushed into a corner. Shang Jun stroked his chin in silence. In contrast, those who came for the spectacle looked to the stage energetically. The struggle between the young man and the tiger came to a deadlock. Blade flashed bitingly, wings swirled in the sky. With each having been wounded, it was difficult to see who was actually winning. It was a brilliant fight, and worth every penny paid. Nevertheless, the white-headed tiger was formed out of hostile energy. The tiger form was merely one of its shapes. Besides the outer injuries on his body, nothing else seemed to be severe. Compared to him, the archmage seemed to be doing a little worse. However, each of his strikes was still full of chivalry, giving no disgrace to Qinan Shrine. Irania leaned back against her seat and said to her teacher, "He is to deal with the white-headed beast while concentrating his energy at the same time to find the enchantment seal. It is rather difficult for Chen Ye to single-handedly fight on his own like this." Su Moi spun his teacup and told her, "It's not that there isn't a seal. The white-headed tiger is bloodthirsty. If Junyo was willing to take the initiative and let it drink half of her blood, then Chen Ye could seal him with full force and they might be able to keep a fraction of her life. But since Junyo is with child, it'll be difficult to preserve her life if she were to lose half of her blood." He carelessly tapped the rim on his cup. "You and Junyo are of the same womb. Your blood is more or less the same. But if you're feeling sympathetic and want to help them, I think it is best not to. Firstly, you'll offend your father and make him upset. Secondly, the archmage standing on stage has always condemned yours growing up in a snake pit. He likely won't want your grace." Irania smiled in sudden realization. "Ah, so doing this can make my father upset? Then it seems I'll have to do it." Su Moi was left with no time to raise a preventing hand. Snow-white wings instantly unfolded and in the blink of an eye flew into the overcast Lingshu terrace. Su Moi froze on his seat. By the time he recovered, he just wanted to ram his head into tofu. Irania loved to wear red. That is, she was also wearing red on this rather unlucky day, contrasting her innately cold looks. The color of red was festive on other people, but when she wore red, she only looked lonely. But though she looked lonely, it was a conspicuous enough color that when her wings soared to the sky, even the archmage who was busy dueling with the white-headed tiger glanced up in distraction. According to the mortal's theatrical plays, affection would certainly form whenever the White Knight and his princess gazed at each other in these critical moments. But what a pity, this screenplay wasn't unfolding like the usual tales. While the young knight gazed at the princess, she raised and drew her bow. Her fathomless glassy eyes intently fixed on the mad tiger. She released the twin arrows as they pierced through the wind into the tiger's eyes. The beast roared in pain. In an instant it could not recognize its directions of attack. Nonetheless, this was a tiger that couldn't be killed by weapons. This move was nothing more than a prolonging tactic to find the seal to the enchantment. Amid the strong wind and beastly roars, the young woman floated mid-air several feet off the ground. She leaned over the black-robed archmage, their proximity rather close. She had betrayed you, why do you still want to save her? The young man with the innately proud face faintly frowned. She is my intended and the Mimi whom I grew up with. Even if she did wrong, how can I not save her when there is a slightest chance of survival? The young woman's dazed eyes revealed a smile. Well said. She softened her voice, then do you also remember? Although I did not grow up with you as Junyo did, I am also your Mimi. Ever since we were children, you had said that I was filthy, that since I was raised by snakes and not on decayed barks, my body had retained a certain filth. When I gave you a birthday present, you threw it away. The young archmage was silent for a length of time. I do remember you, Xiongli Irania. The young woman curved her mouth into a smile and suddenly neared his ear. I assume you still haven't found a way to seal the white-headed tiger back into the magical encasement. The tiger appeared to have finally adapted to the pain of blindness and figured how to distinguish position through resonances. It roared menacingly and swept its claws forth. The young man seized the aerial maiden's hand in a tight grasp and retreated a few steps backward. At this time, from her fingers suddenly materialized a broken blade. Her long sleeves fluttered in the wind. Taking advantage of their entwined fingers, she punctured their two palms, blood gushing down. The young man was slightly taken aback. They seemed to almost be avoiding the tiger's attacks purely by instincts, their 10 fingers still entwined. In the middle of the maneuvering, the young woman looked straight into his eyes as a smile appeared on her calm face. They all tell me an archmage's blood has the ability to cleanse offensive filth. After receiving your excellency's grace today, I wonder whether my blood will be much cleaner now. Their blood mingled and winded down their matching palms, the raw scent festering in the air. The young man did not show any emotions, neither did he withdraw his hand. Why are you trying to provoke me? You're not one to mind these sorts of things, especially in such times as this. The young woman swept her glance around and replied insouciantly, I've lived meaninglessly for so many years, I never knew that's the type of person I'm not. Throughout their dodging, the two had moved closer to the saber. Her expression became solemn as she borrowed the wind force and pushed the young man away. Then with all her might, she flapped her wings toward the saber. The man also spread his wings and hastily followed her, but a sudden burst of red light radiating from the saber blocked him out. Inside the red glow, the young woman firmly gripped onto the holy saber using her freshly cut palm. A new wound was added to her old one. A steady stream of blood continuously saturated the blade. The white-headed tiger suddenly stopped its attacks and snarled a satisfied growl. Despite her paling face, good humor surfaced her countenance when she faced the suddenly docile tiger and said, "Good boy, this much blood must have been enough for you to drink. There should be some limits to having fun, quickly come back." The tiger swung its tail and head, and really went into the blade. Because the blood it drank also contained the Archmage's purifying blood, the saber instantly sealed the moment it went in. The red glow disappeared. The dark aura circling around the saber during the tiger's sharp attacks was also now gone from sight. The holy saber seemed to have lost its support and fell over. A frazzled Junyo hid behind Chen Ye. Chen Ye looked to the saber lying on the ground and saw Irania emerging from behind the blade. She walked with faltering steps, bearing it all as if nothing was wrong. She then tore an edge from her sleeve and bound her right injured hand in a tied knot. The audience picked their chins off the floor. It appeared they had many things to say regarding this wonderful turn of events. But these courtiers stressed on being dutiful subjects. They had to take into account Shang Jun's wrath, and thus repressed their enthusiasm. Shang Jun's mood on the surface was inscrutable, but one could reckon he was erupting on the inside. His desire to kill Junyo hadn't been there for a mere day or two. As he was finally able to taste his dream, the worst of luck sent Chen Ye to come rob the execution grounds. He had likely placed high hopes on the white-headed tiger, trusting its ability would subdue even Chen Ye. The Archmage was someone who monitored the throne on behalf of heaven. Being too proud and upright of a person, Chen Ye was also a thorn in his eyes. But he did not expect Irania to also pop up halfway into the show. What kind of luck was this? Now that things had come to this point, on how to go from here was naturally contingent on the king's judgment. Shang Jun stonily and regally swept his eyes across the terrace. He opened his royal mouth and gave a measured edict. Although Princess Junyo had escaped her death penalty, she could not be exempted from living punishment. She was to be demoted into a commoner, forever banished from the imperial city. While Archmage Chen Yi's coming to her rescue wasn't illegal by ancestral law, it was done out of personal feelings. His duty was the monitoring of the throne, yet he allowed favoritism to play into this affair and thereby sullied the Archmage title. This matter was to be reported to Zhu Kongtian on the same day, and he was to be expelled from Qinan Palace. He was also demoted into a commoner, never allowed to enter the imperial city again. As for Irania, as a princess she had acted with indiscretion when she stirred up a ruckus on the execution grounds in broad daylight. As punishment, she was to lose her pension and self-reflect on her behaviors. Shang Jun had given careful consideration. It would be a significant matter if someday a princess were to die in the palace or an archmage were to die in the holy shrine. But two commoners dying inexplicably would not merit any chatters. Escaping death was already fortunate enough. Junyo placed her palms together and performed a princess's obeisance for the last time while Chen Ye dropped his gaze to the floor. No expression could be detected on his face. Irania turned to Shang Jun, however, and with a blithe smile, she said, "I have been so brave in the name of sisterly love today that I was actually hoping for praise from your majesty. It doesn't seem to me that this penalty is very fair." Before Shang Jun could call her insolent, she went on, "Furthermore, this is related to His Excellency the Archmage. A few days ago, Zai sent to me a letter. He wanted to invite the Archmage over to make a lapis mirror. It will be given to the heavenly envoy when he next comes to our valley to be brought back to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince on heaven as a birthday present. Speaking of which, this was all caused by his excessive words. When he last went to Zhejiang to seek audience with Tianjun, he had boasted to the Crown Prince of Lord Chen Yi's mirror-making ability. He did not expect His Royal Highness would remember such things. She assumed a helpless look. Zei's instructed me to invite His Excellency Chen Ye to our estate to focus on making the mirror, but at present, Your Majesty is ordering for his permanent banishment from the imperial city. Of course I cannot go against Father's royal edict, but I likewise cannot go against my husband's instructions. I thus have some questions. Would it be better to move the estate outside the imperial city? And also, where will the moving money come from? Shang Jun rubbed his forehead and asked, Zei's had really sent a letter? Where is it? Without blinking an eye, Irania replied, he really did send a letter, but I don't have it with me at this time. My teacher was also there when the letter was delivered, however. She glanced to the seat next to Shang Jun. Mother came to visit and also took a look, they all saw it. The letter mentioned a few materials I needed to prepare for the lapis mirror, but because I didn't understand much of it, I handed the letter to my teacher and asked him for a few advices. Shang Jun swept his blazing eyes to Sumoy. Mo Xiao, who drank bloody mold, twitched his lips and nodded. That is indeed correct, but since I'm not a part of the Bianiao clan, there were some materials I did not know, so I handed the letter to the queen asking her to take a look. Eager to save her nephew, the queen also nodded her head. Shang Jun ruminated for a long while and decreed that for the sake of the imperial treasury, Irania did not need to relocate her house. Chen Ye was to bring his convicted self to Irania's estate for the making of the mirror. He was forbidden to leave the premise before its completion. Once the mirror was completed, he must leave the capital straight away. Like this, the matter was settled. The finale was coming to an end. The lenient guards did not immediately take Junyo into custody. They let her kneel on the ground to cleanse Chen Yi's wounds. Lingshu Terrace was now deserted. The red-robed maiden did not show any intention to leave. Her complexion was drained due to excessive bleeding, but she kept on walking in a leisurely strolling pace. When she reached the unlucky sweethearts, she squatted down before them and locked eyes with Junyo. At long last, she moved her lips into a chillingly sarcastic laughter. What a pity for the admirable betrothed couple! And yet you two are no longer related starting from this day. Do remember to keep some distance from him. She rested her right hand on Chen Yi's shoulder. It was I who saved him, he is mine. Junyo replied in tears and resentment, Chen Ye isn't yours. I know I don't deserve him, but neither do you. Lingshu Terrace majestically hung in the sky. After the windstorm, a few scattered clouds were left drifting behind. As though in a good mood, the red-robed woman paced along the stage and reached her hand out to the clouds. This world is full of unpredictability. Everything depends on one's heart, if not one's heart then one's fate, if not one's fate then the prevailing times. Take a look around you. What is the current situation, where are we at? The Archmage's colorlessly abysmal eyes slowly frosted up, seemingly to have frozen into ice. The tea had cooled, the recalling of the past stopped here. Each time he recalled memories of Irania, Mo Xiao was inflicted with some pain. Fengju considerately changed for Mo Xiao a new cup of tea. She waited a bit, then tactfully brought up a question in mind. This thing called love is similar to the mother and child tree on heaven. There are hundreds of fruits on this one tree, and so I know there must be different types of love. But Irania was already married to Zeiss. Isn't it inappropriate for her to develop feelings for Chen yet? She had been spending more time with Zeiss lately, and had unconsciously considered him a friend. She inevitably felt upset on his behalf. She and Zeiss were said to be a married couple, Mo Xiao started to tell her, but they were more like a pair of old friends. Compared to us, these Bianiao fairies are much more fragile. With their shorter lifespan, they seem to indulge in pleasures more than we do. But with that said, Zeiss was actually more abstemious compared to some of the immortals outside of this valley. He took care of Irania even better than I, who was her teacher. After being wordless for half a day, Fengju asked, "The person you're talking about, is he the one who is close to Junyo and Changdi, the one who, for some reason, is being quite good to me lately?" Lord Zeiss. Mo Xiao coughed. Well, this place was forcefully created, so perhaps some errors had cropped up. It's very possible his temperament was slightly altered. In the past, Lord Zeiss was an utterly abstemious person. Fengju refrained herself from asking Mo Xiao on how to return his lordship to his former temperament, instead turning to even more curious things. Since Irania and Chen Ye would be spending more time with each other, and Irania had saved him that time, did he end up liking her at all? Su Moi gazed to the far distance outside the window. The Bianiao clan held chastity very important. Chen Ye did not find it agreeable that Lady Qinghua was married to 2 husbands. Among the 3 sisters, only Junyo was mildly acceptable in his eyes. He didn't like the sight of Irania and Changdi, whom Qinghua had given birth for Shangjun after her remarriage. Irania, in particular, ranked first on his blacklist of the people he despised. But she had saved him, Fengju remarked with some surprise. Isn't this a great favor one needed to repay with his own life? Mo Xiao coldly replied. Chen Ye was proud and cold. In his view, since he had once looked down on Irania and slighted her, her bringing him to the estate meant her treating him as a plaything and confining him for revenge. It was more accurate to say that he hated her than to say he was grateful and liked her. At length he said, "I sometimes recall those words of Irania's, whether man or God, one must follow his heart, his fate, and the prevailing times." She understood these words only too well, but perhaps while her heart was with Chen Ye, her fate was not with him. Fengju was quite saddened to hear these remarks. "Give it some thought," Su Moi said after a sip of tea. "If you are willing to help, have Cha Cha send me a letter." End of chapter 7.